Okay, so let's go ahead and go over those questions from Chapter 6, Part A. So the first question that we have is, where is Serafina going? Well, if you look, she was pretending to be a shoe shiner because she didn't want to get caught. And Brayden kind of picked up on that she was maybe not telling the whole truth. She was telling a story so she wouldn't get in trouble. So he told her to get in the carriage. And so both Brayden and Serafina are together, and they are heading to someone else's house. His Aunt Edith said, if you look on page 79, he says that they are, he's heading to the Vances. So it says, I'm on my way to the Vances and I'm running late. I don't have time to wait on you, so you'll have to come with me and do it in the carriage on the way. I bet Serafina at that point is like freaking out inside. Like she's like, oh my gosh, what? And then our second question is, who is the new character? Well, if you look on the last page that we read, which is page 85, Brayden had said that this isn't the first time that a disappearance of a girl has happened at Biltmore. If you look at the very top of 85, it says 2 weeks ago, a 15-year-old girl named Anastasia Rostinova went out for a walk in the evening of the rambles, and she didn't come back. Oh, so some things are getting pretty crazy here in this story. Disappearances and new characters, and I can't wait to finish this chapter. All right, we are going to go ahead and finish the rest of Chapter 6. So we're going to be starting at the bottom of page 85. We're going to go up to that second paragraph from the bottom because that is the last paragraph that we read before we were starting this. So the Serafina thought that sounded about right. Brayden seemed as loyal to Gideon as Gideon was to him. They were friends, and she liked that. Then she thought about the poor girl and what might have happened to her. Anastasia Rostinova, she repeated, the funny-sounding name. She's the daughter of Mr. Rostinova, the Russian ambassador, Brayden explained. She told me that the Russian girls always put an at the end of their last name. What did she look like? She asked, wanting to make sure that she hadn't gotten her kidnapped rich girls mixed up. She's tall and pretty and has long curly black hair, and she wears an elaborate red dresses that look really hard to walk in. Do you think that she vanished like Clara Brams? Serafina asked. Before he could answer, something caught her eye through the carriage windows. There were trees on either side of the carriage. They were traveling down a narrow dirt road that wound through the thick and darkened forests. The very forest that her pa had warned her to never enter. In the very forest where she had been born. She couldn't help but feel a pang of trepidation. Where are we going exactly? My aunt and uncle are worried about me, so they are sending me to the Vances in Asheville for the night to keep me out of harm's way. They ordered Crankshaw to guard me. That wasn't very smart, she said before she could help herself. It wasn't a very polite thing to say, but for some reason, she was having a dickens of a time not telling Brayden the truth. I've always detested that man, Brayden agreed, but my uncle depends on him. As she looked out the window at the forest, she could no longer see the horizon or the sun. All she could see was the thick density of the forest's huge old trees, black and decrepit, which grew so closely together that she could barely tell one from another. It seemed a dark and foreboding place for anyone to even visit, let alone live. But there was something that excited her about it, too. But then she felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. Somewhere miles behind them was Biltmore. Her pa would be wondering why she wasn't showing up for dinner. No chickens or grits tonight, Pa. I'm sorry, she thought. Try not to worry about me. A day ago, she had been leading a perfectly normal life, catching rats in the basement, and now everything had turned so bizarre. Pulling her gaze away from the forest, she finally turned to Brayden, swallowed hard, and began to say what she had come for. There's something I need to tell. How come I've never seen you before? He interrupted. What? She asked, taken aback. Where did you come from? Yeah, Good question, she said before she could stop herself imagining the bloody pile of dead creatures that her paw had plucked her from. I'm serious, he said, staring at her. Why haven't I seen you before? Maybe you haven't been looking in the right places, she shot back at him, feeling cornered. But when she saw his eyes, she realized that he wasn't going to give up. Her temples began to pound, and she couldn't think straight. Why was he asking her all these infernal questions? Well, where do you come from? She asked, trying to throw him off the trail. You know I live at Biltmore, he said gently. I'm asking about you. She stammered, staring at her lap. Maybe you met me before and just forgot, she said. I would have remembered you, he said quietly. Well, maybe I'm just visiting for the weekend, she said, weakly looking at the floor. He wasn't buying any of it. Please tell me where you live, Serafina, he said firmly. It surprised her when he said her name like that. It had tremendous power over her, like she had no choice but to look up at him and meet his gaze, which turned out to be a serious mistake. He was looking at her so intently that it felt like as he were casting a spell of truth on her. I live in your basement, she said, and she was immediately shocked that she had actually uttered it out loud. He had the powers over her that she did not understand. He stared at her as her words hung in the air. She could see the confusion in his face and the sense of questions forming in his mind. She had no idea why she said it. It just came flying out of her mouth. But she had done it. She said it out loud, straight to his face. Please forgive me, Pa. She wrecked everything. She ruined their lives. Now Pa would be fired. They'd be kicked out of Biltmore. They'd be forced to wander the streets of Asheville, begging for scraps of food. No one would hire a man who had lied to his employer, holed up in his basement and stolen food from him for his 8-toed daughter. No one. She looked at Braden. Please don't tell anyone, she said quietly. But she knew there were no claws in the paw, nothing at all to protect her. If he wanted to, he could tell anyone, Mr. Crankshaw, Mr. Bozeman, and even Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt. And then the life she and her pa had made at Biltmore would be over. They might even go to prison for stealing food for all those years. Just as Braden was about to speak, the horses screamed, and the carriage slammed to a halt. She was hurled across the open space and crashed into him. Gideon leapt to his feet and began to bark wildly. Something has happened, Braden said fiercely, as he quickly untangled himself from her and opened the carriage door. It was pitch dark outside. She tried to listen for what was out there, but her heart pounded so loudly that she couldn't hear a thing. She tried to calm herself down and really listen, but the forest was too quiet. There were no owls, no frogs, no insects, no birds, none of the normal night sounds she was used to hearing, just silence. It was like every living creature in the forest was hiding for its dear life, or already dead. Mr. Crankshaw? Braden asked uncertainly into the darkness. No answer came. The hairs on the back of Serafina's neck stood on end. Braden stepped apart out of the carriage and looked up at the driver's bench at the front. There's no one there, he said in astonishment. They're both gone. The 4 horses were still in their harnesses, but the carriage had stopped, dead in the road, right in the middle of the forest. And that is the end of Chapter 6. Thanks for listening.